John, how are you doing?
I'm borderline spectacular. Thanks for asking, Ben. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How about a 30-second introduction of who you are, what you do?
Oh boy, if I can do that in 30 seconds, that would be a record.
Okay.
Well, my name is John Melbye. I have my own consulting company focused on education in the supply chain space, mainly in the demand-driven MRP methodology. And I am also managing director of ASCM-Twin Cities. ASCM is the Association for Supply Chain Management, and helping to manage the organization up here in Minneapolis, the Twin Cities, and surrounding region.
Wow. Quite a bit of responsibility. That's great to hear. All right, let's go all the way back to your formative years. Like, where did you grow up? That type of thing. Were you from the Midwest originally, Minnesota, Wisconsin?
Yeah, I'm originally from Wisconsin. I like to tell people I haven't yet completed the growing up phase.
Okay.
That's still a work in process. But yes, I'm from Wisconsin. Went to UW Madison way back when. We won't go into how long ago that was. And spent time I did some work in agriculture at the beginning. Then I moved into computers. Then somewhere I found supply chain. And then I found supply chain education. So I've kind of had four careers throughout my history. I lived overseas in Istanbul, Turkey for about 4 years between 95 and 99. Put a 19 in front of that for the younger folks. And then I made it back here to the Twin Cities, had a retail store for about a year and a half, and then got back into computers, which then led me into the supply chain world, which then led me to APICS and ASCM, which then led me to the Demand Driven Institute, which then led me to teaching about supply chain.
Wow, impressive. So you kind of stumbled upon supply chain later in your life. It wasn't like you went to UW Wisconsin and you're like, yeah, I want to be in supply chain.
Yeah, no, I have a degree in dairy science.
Oh, okay.
Maybe the little interesting sideline here is that I started out in agricultural education,
Okay.
and something kind of didn't sit right with me there, so I got out of that before I graduated. And then, fast forward 30 years later, I find supply chain education, and I'm back into my original. I love teaching people, which is, I hate to say it like that. I love sharing stories and helping guide people through their journey, because what happens is I learn just as much as they learn, and so it keeps me fresh and keeps me learning as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Same thing here. Now let's go back to that period. You said you were 4 years abroad in Turkey. How and why did that happen? That's interesting. Didn't know that.
So at the time I married a Turkish woman, and the plan was to move here. And through a couple of kind of odd scenarios or coincidences or whatever, just dumb luck, I said, here's an opportunity for me to live overseas and kind of get that experience. Which, in today's world, students are in some universities are forced to go overseas for a semester. We didn't have that when I grew up, so going overseas was a huge thing. So the opportunity kind of showed up, and I jumped at it and spent 4 years over there, and then we decided it was time to move back here. And if we just kind of complete that circle, I moved back to the U.S. with the understanding that my wife would follow me. Uh, Somewhere in that waiting period, she got an offer with the company she worked for, which was McDonald's, to move to Singapore and work there for a while. And so she went there with the intention of being there for 2 to 3 years, ended up there 11 and a half years. So I was in the U.S., she was in Singapore, and just a little bit of geography. You can't get farther apart than
Wow.
from the U.S. to Singapore. So any further away, she would have been closer again. But
Jeez.
it gave us an opportunity to travel throughout Asia quite a bit, as well in that window of time.
Okay, that's pretty amazing because living abroad overseas is pretty rare for most people, right? They start their career, they get into their buying a house, marrying, and then have a couple of kids, and then they really don't talk about living overseas. So good for
Yeah.
you for having that eye-opening experience.
It really was a great experience, and allowed me to learn a second language, which is another big thing that a lot of people don't get a chance for. I'm trying to learn a third language, but because I'm not forced to speak it, it's a slow process.
Yeah, that'd be challenging. All right, let's go back. So you moved back to the Twin Cities, and you said you stumbled upon supply chain. So what do you mean by that? How did that work out? How did that look?
So when I first moved back, I had a retail store selling Turkish decorative items, and that didn't work out. So I ended up then working for Parker Hannifin in the computer world with computer support and that kind of thing. And at one point, I said to the leadership there, I said, I need to know the direction the company is going. I can't make my IT decisions in a vacuum. I have to know kind of what you're trying to accomplish. And they put me in this lean steering committee because back then lean was the choice they had made, and I loved it. And I wanted to learn everything I could. I worked with the consultants. I got really deep into the manufacturing and the thought processes around the Toyota production system. And at one point, they needed somebody to fill a space, and they looked around the room and went, well, I guess John's the only one that's really interested in this. So they moved me into that role, which started me on that supply chain journey, and got me somewhere around the same time period. I found the APICS or ASCM, Association for Supply Chain Management, as a support community. Right? Because when you're in supply chain and there isn't a bunch of supply chain knowledgeable people in your company, or at least thinking about, they know what they know, but how do I learn and how do I grow? Well, that's where ASCM came in. And then I ended up at a conference in 2012 where I came across the Demand Driven Institute, and I've been following that ever since. So just a constant lifelong learning experience, all driven from finding, through luck, finding my way into supply chain and recognizing that I didn't really have the knowledge, so I needed somebody to support me in that knowledge gain.
Okay. Now, John, I think if most people look you up on LinkedIn, they'll see that you have about 4 or 5 different professional certifications behind your name. So which was the first one did you seek out, and what was that about?
So the first one I did was the CSCP, the Certified Supply Chain Professional from APICS back at the time. I mean, it's still an APICS certification. There's a lot of confusion around APICS and the Association for Supply Chain Management. They are the same organization. The certifications are APICS. The organization name is slightly different, but the body of knowledge is still the APICS body. So I started with CSCP, and that's what led me in that particular year. While I was taking that class, I went to the ASCM or the APICS conference in Denver, Colorado.
What year was this?
That was 2012. And I, again, just the luck of the day, I stumbled into a session by Carol Patak and Chad Smith about the demand-driven material requirements planning methodology, which was really just brand new about then. And I said, well, that sounds kind of interesting. I really think that's something I'm going to keep an eye on. And probably a year and a half later or so, I saw that there was a demand-driven conference, and they were offering a certification class taught by one of the founders of the methodology. So I said, I'm going. Let's see if this is real. And then I got through that certification, decided in fact it was real, and spoiler alert, it's demand-driven material requirements planning is the evolution of material requirements planning. as soon as people figure out that the way we're working today is not solving the problems in this volatile world we live in, they're going to have to move to it. So that's my that was the stepping stone that led me then to the Demand Driven Leader program in about 2016, which is around the same time I started teaching for APICS, and I said maybe I could teach this demand driven stuff, and they said sure. So then I got the Demand Driven Operations certification, and then the Demand Driven Distribution certification. So all of these things have just been kind of a progressive journey of self-improvement, learning, and trying to then share that knowledge with others so they can have that same experience that I had, those aha moments of, oh my gosh, you mean the thing we've been doing and working so hard at is actually contributing to the problems, not the solution? And then once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I saw a lot of that Demand Driven Institute that you're a part of. Maybe can you explain a little bit more, because I really didn't know about it, and only coming from you. So is it a part of APEX, or is it within APEX? Can you explain that a little bit?
So there's probably a long history there, but Carol Patak and Chad Smith are the two founders of the Demand Driven Institute. And Carol Patak was the president of APICS back in the year 2000. First woman president of APICS, and there was a long stretch before we had another one. But she and Chad Smith founded this Demand Driven Institute and this Demand Driven methodology, which I would say is complementary to the APICS body of knowledge, right? It's called Demand Driven MRP because MRP is still a valid function. It's just kind of how you apply that. So it's a slight change in the way we think about MRP, or material requirements planning, without throwing out what you know. We need to fix a couple of problems in that area, and then everything starts to work. So it's complementary with the APICS body of knowledge, but it turns around and improves, and it frankly adds Lean, Theory of Constraints, Six Sigma, Material Requirements Planning, Distribution Requirements Planning. It combines all of that into one program. And the conceptually, right, there's great things in the Lean program, but it's not, it doesn't solve everything. There's great things in Theory of Constraints, but it doesn't give you everything. So no single methodology gives you everything. So when DDMRP came out and said, we're going to combine the best of those, and we're going to fix the problems in each of them in different ways, that made so much sense to me. that why would you choose a program that solves some problems but doesn't solve others? Why wouldn't you have solutions for everything? So the people who say, we are lean and I don't care about any other methodology, to me are missing the boat. You take the best, what works for you. No methodology solves everything. Even demand driven doesn't work everywhere. So you apply the methodologies that work where you need them to work, and because every company is slightly different or has differences, it's different for every company. So you have to take that into account as you apply these improvements and these improvement tools.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very interesting. I think it was around 2016, 2017, I was on my way out, leaving Minnesota, leaving Apex and all of that community, and I just come across you. You were kind of someone I just met and then just coming on board. I believe you took over the presidency, I believe. Can you tell me a little bit of that experience and that chapter?
Yeah. And that was, thanks for your support through that process. I started, so the fun story that I like to tell, one of our colleagues here and a person I consider a mentor, his name is Orville Vaughn.
Yes.
He's one of our instructors here for the chapter. And I took a class with him probably around the 2015 time frame, 2016, somewhere in there. And at the end of it, he asked me how what did I think? And I said, there's a lot of good information here, but I really wanted something more practical that I could go back to work and have something to implement tomorrow. And he said those fateful words, "How would you like to help us make it better?" and I answered kind of naively, "Sure, why not?" And that started me down a path of helping create some more practical education options through the chapter, which got me more connected with the chapter, which ended up leading me to become the president of the chapter. And that post I held for almost 7 years, until very recently. And very happily, my whole goal was to pass the torch to somebody who wanted to take it on. And that's, as we went through COVID, supply chain people were so busy and still are. Finding someone who says, "Yeah, I'd love to volunteer an extra 40 hours a week to something else for nothing, for no money." And, people who have kids, people who have families or parents to deal with. I mean, all kinds of different reasons why people don't have time. So I feel like I moved the chapter from one point to another. I don't know if it was the right places or the right direction, but we're still here and trying to be constantly innovating and recognizing that things are changing, right? So an ASCM chapter is a nonprofit, education-focused, networking-focused supply chain community asset. So what does that mean? Well, it means we provide trainings for people, for individuals, and so what's traditionally been is we provide trainings for individuals, and that helps the individual. And there's always the hope that it helps the company that they work for. So as we evolve and we try and say, okay, what trainings can I offer an individual that the company is trying, that helps the company achieve the goals they're trying to achieve, is different than just saying, hey, we offer here's the education we offer. And then the other thing that's been happening that we're finally kind of catching on to is the student is changing. So people are going through college now and coming out without having to have a face-to-face in person with the professor. The asynchronous learning where they submit some things online and the professor or the instructor reads it and maybe assigns homework, and they may never actually meet face-to-face or even online in a Zoom call. And that student is now in the marketplace looking for classes. And if all we offer is the face-to-face or the Zoom call, in-person, 15-week long commitment, every Wednesday you have to be available kind of an approach, that's not the student market anymore. So constantly trying to evolve the chapter to be what the supply chain community and what the companies who are seeking us, what they need, that's a challenge, and one that we, continuous. When we talked about way back at Parker, we talked about continuous improvement. And I'm living that, where the idea I had 2 months ago or 6 months ago, that wasn't quite right, so we have to evolve it. And the next 6 months or the next year later, we've changed the program. And so many people are fixed or fixated on stability that we have to set a program and that's going to be the program for the next 20 years. That world, I think, is gone. So we have to constantly reinvent ourselves or reimagine ourselves and find what is the value to our members and to the supply chain community so we can continue to support buyers and planners and logistics people and everybody in supply chain, including company leadership. How can we maintain relevance in this ever-changing world? And that to me is the role of the president. A couple of years ago I became managing director, so now I'm kind of half-time paid staff for the chapter, trying to maintain the stability and yet the innovation. So having the vision and then allowing time to apply that vision is what happens when you get a little more time leading the chapter. What the chapters used to be, and many still are, is basically a 1 year, presidency for 1 year, and then let somebody else do it.
Yeah.
And what I learned in my first year was, in the first year, by the end of that year, I figured out what kinds of things I could do. And then I'm not president anymore, so not really a great consistency throughout. So to be the same president for 6 or 7 years really gave us a vision and the application of that vision. So some small part of stability at the same time as constant reinventing ourselves.
Okay, good. I didn't know anything about that in terms of, that you served as president for that long and then had that continuous service. Good to hear. All right, so how has the chapter evolved in the last 10 years? Since I was there, I think I don't remember now, 2013, 14 or something like that.
Yeah, 2015-ish.
Yeah.
So over the years, so when I came on, what we had at the time, and I'm sure you remember this, you filled one of these roles where we had a board of directors that was made up of specific job responsibilities.
Yeah, that's right.
So you were the connection with the student world and the universities. We had somebody who was managing the monthly professional development meetings, somebody else who was in charge of membership, somebody else in charge of seminars and different things, and somebody in charge of tours. And what ended up happening was the person in charge of the monthly meetings would burn out pretty fast because you had to have something on the calendar every month going into the future. And the person in charge of the membership, really, when the model evolved, the membership person didn't really have that much to do. So we tried to figure out how to change the tasks as the different pieces evolved. But eventually I said, let's try 3 strategic groups of board members. And one is focused on member engagement. So that could be the monthly meetings, the seminars, whatever constituted member engagement. We had one that was strategic direction and growing the business. And we had one that was completely focused on education and what education should be. And that sort of worked for a little bit, but it was, kind of one of those things where you put somebody in charge of that committee, even though you've given them support, they're still kind of the one under pressure. And so it had its moments, but it also didn't continue to work. And we're still in that evolution of what do we do now? Now we've said the board is there for decision making and helping us with the vision setting, and the staff of the chapter will be the people that will actually execute. So that's where we have 2 people, or me and one other on staff, that are trying to do all the execution of what the board thinks we should do to grow the chapter. So that means the board position has evolved, the people we have on staff, that has evolved, and we're still in that evolution, trying to kind of find the right balance of everything, so that we don't overwhelm the staff, and we don't have so many events that people stop coming because it's like there's one every week. So what's the balance of how often we have something so that we don't overwhelm the staff and don't underwhelm the membership? So that's kind of where we are today.
Okay. And along those same lines, I recall one of the greatest aspects I loved and enjoyed about APEX was the in-person teaching in the evenings for my certification, CSCP or CPIM, etc. So I assume that's still going on. If I could go back to the Hamlin building there in St. Louis Park, Is that still taking place in terms of evening courses taught by the staff?
So, what kind of happened with COVID is we had to shift to virtual classes.
Oh,
And especially with the certifications, right? You think about this where you're meeting for 3 or 4 hours every week at a location in person. But our market has shifted, and now we have people who are coming from farther away from the Twin Cities, and we have people from Florida or California or New York that join our classes. So we've kind of on those where we have to allow that market to join us. We have shifted totally to the online educational program. So through Zoom, we still do the same thing. We go through the slides. We meet once a week, but it's all online. And of course, being from Minnesota, when the snow hits and people don't have to, risk their lives getting to a class, that's a beneficial thing in the winter. It's less beneficial in the summer where you want to go out and get outside of your house every once in a while. So for the certification classes, we have shifted to online almost entirely, unless if a company comes forward with a larger group of people, we can do in person, and then it's only really the instructor and maybe open it up to the public to join an in-person class. And then we had to shift from the place you're aware of. We now work with a St. Cloud State University campus in Plymouth, Minnesota, when we do have in-person classes. And we've done a couple of those where they are, we offer a basics of MRP that is a Lego simulation of a penguin factory, and that shows people how MRP works hands-on. That has to be in person. And then we offer some other kind of mastermind classes where we want people to work in groups, and we just feel that's easier and more beneficial to do in person. So we still offer some in person, but it's those long-term commitments and that longer, 10 to 15 weeks at 3 hours a week has shifted to online.
wow. Okay, I didn't know that. So a little bit, definitely a difference than when I would recall
Yeah.
the good old days.
And part of that was, so I started teaching with those in-person classes, and that, so you kind of got used to that, and that was really what was offered. And prior to COVID, ASCM said, well, maybe we should jump onto this online thing. So they were piloting some stuff, and then when COVID hit and we couldn't meet in person, that just pushed us over the top. And the evolution of all of the online tools that are still evolving. We're still learning as instructors how to manage those. We're still learning as students have different knowledge. Some use Zoom, some use Teams, some use some other platform. So they don't all know all of the platforms, but people are getting much more comfortable with the online way of teaching.
All right. Now, I recall also during my time there, we had the PDMs, professional development meetings. So I think we had a dinner in the evening once a month, and then we'd go to a location, a manufacturer, a factory, whatever it may be, and then we'd see the inner workings and behind the scenes of that. Now, is that still offered?
That's something that with COVID, of course, we couldn't do that. So we shifted to some mostly online webinars. And frankly, I got burned out on the online webinars, online networking stuff. So it's fairly rare that I will attend anymore or create or attend an online webinar-like scenario. That's not to say I don't attend, because sometimes it's a far away event and I want to hear the content. So we're slowly trying to get back to that, or find our way to an equilibrium somewhere between. We've been focusing on networking events. So we had one in December, and we go to a brewery. It's an open space. give a couple of drink tickets and people can network and talk to each other. We had one in December. We have one tonight. Oh. So these we want to do this. We're trying to do something every month, and maybe have kind of quarterly networking events, and then offset with a quarterly tour, and then one of the other months of the quarter to have either a webinar or an in-person event, things like that. And one of the things we've added in the last, this will be our third year now, we're doing a supply chain summit. So the first 2 years we did full day events with dinner the night before, and this year we're trying to reduce that price point, so we're doing a half day with either 3 or 5 speakers. So there will be 3 sessions that you could join, 2 at this hour, 2 at this hour, and 1 at this hour, that will allow you to choose between these two, and then come to the joint session. But so for half price of our full day event, you get to kind of have a more solid educational piece, as well as the networking part that comes with those in-person kind of events.
Mm-hmm. All right, good to know. All right, as we wind down here, what advice would you give to someone that's interested in supply chain, whether he or she is a recent graduate in her 20s, or someone like you and I who kind of stumbled upon supply chain later in life? So what are some ways to get involved or learn more?
So, the first thing that I kind of tell everybody is supply chain is everywhere. So there's nothing you can think of that doesn't have some form of a supply chain with it. They're not all the same. Manufacturing, different from distribution, different from banking or ticket sales or sporting events, right? Everything has supply chain in it. So, and even our regular lives, right? We use supply chain scheduling to go to work in the morning. When do I need to be at work? Based on that, I know when I need to leave the house. Based on that, I know when I need to wake up. And so I schedule my time just like I'm scheduling the receipt of goods in a supply chain. So we use this all the time. So the advice I give to people is, if you don't know for sure what you want to do, supply chain is a great option for, maybe you want to work in the hotel business, but you don't really want to manage a hotel, but you like the hotel business. Well, they're going to have a supply chain. Maybe you want banking. Maybe you want manufacturing. Whatever thing you can think of, if you think of an industry, supply chain is going to give you an option there. As will other things like accounting. Everybody has to have accounting. So, but supply chain has such variety to it. So first of all, it's everywhere. And secondly, you could work in shipping and scheduling, or you could work in planning and buying and procurement, and you could work in logistics and mission critical stuff for vaccines that have to be refrigerated, or foods that have to be carefully managed, right? There is such a variety of things in supply chain. So keep your mind open to trying different things and finding out what you like, because it's a long, painful life if you choose a job and then you decide you don't like it, and now you have to work 40 or 50 years in that area. So being flexible to change, and that leads then into the next piece, which is continuous learning. Just because you came out of college with a degree in supply chain doesn't mean the world didn't evolve. Often in my trainings I will say, while I issued that last sentence, something changed in the world that maybe makes that a questionable statement. So you can't just assume that because this is the way we've done it in the past, this is the way it's always going to be. And always question everything that you know. Right? We know to question the things we don't know, but I say question the things you do know. Then the more certain you are that that's true, the more times you should question it. It might remain true, but if you assume it's true and it evolves and changes to be not true, that's an embarrassing place to be. So just always keep your focus on learning and growing and seeing different perspectives and understanding. So the supply chain, right? So if you go to college and you're in the supply chain area, you've got a bunch of students that you're sharing your time with. You're on projects together. You have a professor to go to. Once you graduate from college, that support just kind of fizzles. And that's where somebody like ASCM, there's a professional organization that has people struggling with the same things you're struggling with, is a great support network, both for just keeping your sanity and for learning how other people have solved similar problems. The number of people in my career that I have put together because they both told me they were having a problem and I recognized they were having the same problem. I put them together and they've realized that each of them had a solution that helped the other. Those are the huge benefits of being in an organization. And then just in general, always be networking. Not because you're looking for a job or because for any reason other than the more people you know, the more chances you'll run across somebody who has solved the problem you're trying to solve, the more chances you will bump into the next person that you're going to want to hire. Or the next company that's doing something interesting that didn't exist 5 years ago. This is when I tell people, what do you want to pick for a career? It doesn't really matter today because 5 years from now there's going to be jobs out there I can't even imagine. So to pick something that's here today and 5 years from now that job is gone and something new is in its place, it's kind of it's not really a waste of time, but just recognize your journey is going to be your journey and you cannot plan 15 years from now, here's where I hope to be, or if you can, that's a very unusual situation.
Wow, such great advice. Yeah, I love it. So important, like you mentioned, about people learning about supply chain if they came from college and then they need that community and that support. And I believe the Twin Cities has one of the most robust supply chain organizations, if I recall, throughout the nation.
Yeah, we've got one of the larger ASCM chapters, but even beyond that, there's other organizations here in supply chain that do conferences, that have events. There's manufacturing networks. There's just I almost come across a new way to connect with people every day, and I can't go join all of them, but I try and join several of them because then I learn, hey, this networking event did this. We could do something like that. So we don't have all the answers, and once you realize the expectation isn't that you have all the answers, but that you have the ability to look around and learn from others and then apply that to what you're doing, whatever it is. That's the way to move forward.
Wow, that's great. I love hearing that, and I also love that part where you mentioned about younger people, and they get really pegged into a career. The things that we're taught when we're younger is get the best grades you can get, and then choose a major because that's what you're going to be doing the rest of your life. And so it's funny to hear what you're saying is kind of like the opposite, is just maybe explore, things will change. Yeah, like you won't know exactly what you'll be doing 5 years from graduation, so really important things to remember.
And it kind of ties back to earlier talking about my journey, right? I have a degree in something that I used for about 3 or 4 years, and then when I went overseas, by then I was more in the computer side of things, and I worked overseas in computers. But then I kind of morphed into more conferences and trainings and stuff like that, and then I came back, did a retail store. Right? You never know where your journey is going to take you. Yeah. And what I like to say is every piece of that journey, I found my home. And then I realized that, well, here's a new home that I have. Here's another thing that I love to do. And so I have finally found where I want to be. I shouldn't say finally. I have found again where I want to be, and who knows what the next chapter is going to bring for me.
Right. Wow. Great overall. So before we close out, any last minute topics or anything you want to add to our conversation before we take off?
I think I think the challenge for everybody in the world today is kind of what we talked about. You don't know where the world's going to go, so you don't know quite where you want to spend your time. And there are so many things that we can look at and say, boy, there's a lot of chaos in that. Think about the tariffs being talked about today, and what's that going to mean, and how are we going to react, and all of the just all the different unknowns out there. So I guess my broad advice is embrace the unknown. In supply chain, for example, there's a lot of chaos in most people's jobs, and the journey is figuring out how to calm that chaos and be able to do your job the way you think you should be able to do it, instead of the emergencies and the firefightings all the time. Similarly, AI is going to take over some tasks, but not all tasks. So finding that path through these events that look like they're causing chaos, but if you find your way through them and bring order to that chaos, then that's the journey you're on. And you're never done.
Yeah. Very well. Well said, John. All right. I really appreciate connecting. Thank you very much.
Yeah, great to catch up, and thank you so much for the opportunity.